I want to get my son back alive. A few more minutes went by, and then he said, all right, we're going to go. 20 pounds and you can come. But I'll tell you, you may regret it. So we climbed down. There was a ladder just down to the boat. He said, be careful of the ladder. Be sure, hold on to the railing beside, the pole beside it. So one by one we went down to the boat. It was an open boat, no cabin. And 9 of us plus him, so 11 altogether, him and his son, were standing in an area really not much larger than this rug. About the size of the bed of a large pickup truck. And as we worked our way through the harbor, we entered the open water. And now I had been through storms in the Atlantic, so I knew how bad it could get. It wasn't as bad as those. But given the size of this boat, it was pretty bad. We basically went up one wave, and then the moment later we'd be down in a trough. And when we were down in that trough, there was water on both sides. And then the next instant, we would be up, and then down again. And we were back this way, and that way, and this way. And for the first little bit, we'd always be thrown against each other, and I'd apologize to the man in front of me as I kept falling into him. And finally he said, look, why don't you just hold on to my shoulders? So I gripped his shoulders, he gripped the side, and within about an hour or so, we were all locked arms, like this. 2 hours later, we had gone far enough into the harbor that we began to get a much better glimpse of the island. It was a lot rougher than that, and our boat was a lot smaller. But as we got closer and closer, we began to notice how the cliffs began to loom up. And at one point, a man behind me started to say, dear God, where are we going to land? Because everywhere we looked, it was just sheer cliffs with waves crashing against it and rocks all around. As it turned out, as we got very close, after about 3 hours, we began to go around one side, and it turns out there was a narrow little area that formed a kind of an artificial harbor. Clearly, somebody had built a little dock there. But the trouble was, and you could see why they had done it, because it was by far the most sheltered place. The trouble was, the wind was such that it was coming directly in that direction. So these huge waves that were built up would rush into this little funnel of land and get larger and larger and larger until they would rush past that little dock to the rocks and cliff just beyond, where they would explode in a huge cascade of water that would go up several stories. And the man behind me, I could hear him say, he started to say the rosary. And he said, dear God, save us. We're not going there, are we? But it was very clear that that's exactly where we were heading. The fisherman maneuvered the boat so it was pointed directly in that direction. And then he said to his son, okay, grab the rope, climb up in the bow. The boy climbed up and, gripping the front of the bow with a rope in one hand, got down in basically a crouch position. And he said, wait until I tell you. And then he gunned the engines. For a while we ran directly towards the rocks, until finally I felt something pushing us, and I looked behind, and the wave, huge wave, had gotten behind us. At that moment, he turned off the engine, and the wave carried us forward like a surfboard, as we get closer and closer directly towards the rocks. About 10 feet from the edge of the pier, the fisherman shouted, now! And the boy sprang, and I thought for a moment he wasn't going to make it. He was in the air, but the momentum of the boat had pushed him forward. So he ended up just on the edge of the pier, ran along beside the boat, and quickly lashed the rope around a lashing just as we passed and caught us. As a moment later, the wave rushed over us, hit against a rock, and exploded. At that point, we had all been thrown off our feet. Most of it, we got up, bruised, shattered, really pretty shaken. And the fisherman just sort of turned calmly to us and says, okay, you have 3 hours. I'm leaving in 3 hours. If you're not making it, I'll be back in a week. So, very unsteadily, we climbed out of the boat and began to climb one by one up ancient stairways that had been basically built 1,500 years ago by the monks. up the side of, at some point we climbed up and up and up. At times we were just, there was sheer cliff beside us. Until finally we got up above. And there, on one side, I saw a little collection of huts, stone huts. I decided I was going to try to explore the island first. So I went off on my own for a while. And I decided I was going to try to see what it was like on the other side. So I climbed up one side. Everything was just so steep. There was almost nothing less than about 45 degrees. Climbed up. It was quite a climb, so I was out of breath. And I was just about ready to step onto the other, over the top of the mountain when a breeze sort of caught me and staggered me back. And at that point I looked down and I realized there was no other half of that island. I was staring straight down, hundreds of feet, to rocks below where the surf was crashing against, going. I paused and then just took a step back. And at that point I decided not to explore the island. Instead I went down to the huts. These were huts that were built by the monks, around 500, made out of stone. And they're called beehive huts for obvious reasons. Stone after stone, cut one on top of another and basically made into almost like stone igloos. They remained in place all this time. At this point, I was there in August. The wind already was so fierce and so cold. I just could try to imagine what it would be like to be there in the middle of winter. I stepped inside one of the huts. And there was a little place at top for smoke to leave. But other than that, it was just like a little stone tent. But I could imagine what it must be like, what it would have been like to get in there in that fierce weather and feel that protection. Through this doorway, you can see the second of the two islands, called Skellig Major. But then I walked around the little community, a series of those huts, a church, really not much bigger than the space from here to the wall, that had a wooden roof that had fallen down. I touched the stone Celtic cross. I went over to the graves that were hard to imagine because it didn't look like there was enough ground to cover the roots of plants, let alone the dead. And I found myself wondering, what would drive people here? What would drive them so far from their homeland? I could see Ireland in the distance, and at that point the mist was coming up, so it was no more than a thin gray line. And then I could turn and look in the other direction, towards the open Atlantic, where I knew that these monks believed the world ended. What would drive a small group of men to live alone on this little pinnacle of stone between home and the edge of the world? And yet there was part of me that knew. So desperately did they seek that reality of God's presence, that it was worth anything to go there. As I returned on the boat, I kept asking myself, would I do that? Would I do that? And there was a part of me that craved it so badly, that craved that reality. And yet I thought, is that the only way to do it? Is that the only way? Is the only way really to go to the mountains, to that extreme? By that point, storm clouds had come up. And before we had gone another hour, the sky had gotten black. It was black, night was falling, but beside that, storms were everywhere. So within another hour, I couldn't tell the difference between the blackness of the sea and the blackness of the sky. And to make matters worse, it began to rain. I made my way up to beside the fisherman, and I said, "How are we getting back?" And he said, "Do you see that light?" And I looked in the distance, and it was a tiny little light. He said, "As long as that stays lit, we'll make our way back." That light has saved my life many times. And if we're lucky, it'll save our life tonight. And I thought, is that what we're talking about? And I said, it seems to be blinking. He said, no, it's not blinking. Remember how when we were coming here, we would go into the waves and come up? Those are the waves that are blocking the way. And it's true, it was so black that I couldn't see it, but there were moments when we would go up the wave and I would hear the engine grinding. And then other times when we would go down the other end, and I could actually hear sometimes the open rudder spinning. But as the rain came, I had just worn a thin little sweater because it had been bright and sunny, and it was August when I left. But as the rain came, I got thoroughly soaked. And after a while, I began to shiver, and then shiver some more. We were all huddled close together, and the woman behind me said, "Is that all you have?" I said, "Yes, that's all I brought." And she felt my forehead, and she said, "Oh my goodness, you're risk of hypothermia." And she said, "Lean back against me." This was the white-haired Belgian woman. And I did. I leaned back, and all of a sudden I felt this warmth around me. I think I must not have been fully conscious, because it was a moment before I realized that what she had done was unzip her jacket and hold me inside of it. Very quickly I began to warm. And as that happened, I began to notice that others who had seen that there were some of us who were very poorly dressed and others who were smart enough to have brought jackets. One by one, people unzipped their jackets and cradled the people who were underdressed around them inside the jackets. I don't actually remember landing. I don't remember going up the ladder. All I remember is the next morning waking up in the bed of Kathleen's room. Somebody had carried me up the ladder. Somebody had taken me home. And when I think about this memory, I realize that I have been to the mountaintop. But it wasn't the island. It was that little boat. Because there I saw what I believe is the real reality. The reality of people helping people. People reaching out to others. People sharing their warmth with those who need it. And as I think of that boat, I also think of the fact that my mountain experience did not end that day. Because in many ways, that boat reminds me of our little community of St. Joseph. Because like that boat, we are working our way through the darkness, but the light is ahead of us. The light never fades, although sometimes we don't always see it. And we care for each other. We offer each other that warmth that we need. This is an experience that the world needs to know about. We have all been to the mountaintop. We need to share that.